Well, it's time we talk about Like a House on Fire. How's it going today? I am Chris Gore from Film Threat, here to talk to you again. I talk about independent film all the time. It's my job to inform you about independent films worth your time and worth seeing. One of the things I always look for when I see an independent film, the thing that always strikes me is authenticity. And that applies whether it's a documentary, whether it's a narrative feature. And I think one of the hardest on a low budget indie scale to hit is authenticity as it relates to drama. I think indie dramas are the toughest to nail. And I'm excited today to talk to the director of Like a House on Fire. His name is Jesse Klein, who's all the way from Montreal. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm in Montreal.
Well, I didn't mean to what I'm saying about what I look for is authenticity, but as it relates to drama, I think that's the toughest to nail when it comes to a genre. I think horror films, those are kind of fun and easy, whatever. When it comes to authenticity in a drama, and what you've done with Like a House on Fire, and I think it really started with the casting. It's the story of an estranged relationship and a mother that lost her opportunity in a sense. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I highly recommend that you seek out the trailer for Like a House on Fire on YouTube. Seek it out and get a taste of this wonderful film. But tell me how you, first of all, came across this story and decided to tell this. I just think that it's a rough subject matter.
Mm-hmm. So there's kind of a number of different ways of how I came to this story. For one, I was living in the US for 6 years before I moved back to Montreal some time ago. And, right at the center of this film is this notion of coming home and what it feels like to come back home and feel like everyone has moved on and left you behind. And so that was certainly one really prominent element that I kind of started with, this feeling, which I do think we all can connect to and have experienced to some extent. And then furthermore, each script that I write, each film that I make, there's not exactly one way that I start, but for this one, it was very much character focused. I had the character of Dara in mind from the outset, and the story came out of her rather than vice versa. It's a really, maybe we'll talk about this later, but in the way that it's shot, in the way that it sounds, it's a very first-person film. And so I really started with Dara, and it's a character who, in all the kind of outward ways that there are differences between she and I, it's a character that I connect to very deeply. And so it's kind of that duality, those two things of starting with the character and with this theme of coming home and how to reintegrate into a family.
Well, on the subject of authenticity in the storytelling, I just think the way you were able to identify with the lead, Dara, I think it was remarkable. It's just, I just would not have expected. We talked before we started recording. I wouldn't have guessed that you don't have kids, right? Because I always I have kids, and whenever I'll see a movie, I'm like, I guarantee that the filmmakers, they don't know what real parenting is, right? They don't know what it's really like to be a parent. And I just would have guessed that you were a parent based on how the subject matter was approached. It felt really authentic to me. And what I'm saying is I don't see that in a lot of, I would say mostly Hollywood movies are guilty of this. But where it just felt so real. And on that note, they always say, animals and children are the thing you should avoid when on a film. What were some of the difficulties of working with the kids on this movie? Because there are some incredibly dramatic moments where you have a very young child that is delivering lines, and I don't know how you did that. So could you explain?
Sure. One of the central tenets of the film is that the daughter doesn't remember the mother. And if that doesn't feel, if you don't believe that when you're watching the movie, I really think the whole thing would sink. And so casting an actress, a little girl, significantly older than, as so often is the case in film, than the actual age of the child in the film, I found was dangerous. And so when we were casting the film, this little girl came in, and she was 4. So we needed a 4-year-old, and this 4-year-old comes in, and there's one scene kind of halfway through the film where there's like an extended amount of dialogue, and she just kind of did it. And I would say she's so young that there's just no, often young actors, many of them great, but they have kind of a bag of tricks and ways in which they interact with the camera. I think this child was too young to even conceive of those. And, it certainly was challenging. I think it was challenging for everyone, or because it takes such precedence to make sure the environment is conducive for the child to do what they need to do in a scene. But yes, I appreciate your saying so. But yeah, it was remarkable working with her, and she's, there's a real just truth and honesty to the way that she interacts. Because like I said, she's 4. There's no pretense.
Well, it's I'm always struck with whenever I see kids deliver such amazing performances. The what was the actor's name? Was it Carrie Guffey in Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
Oh, yeah.
The way that Spielberg elicited this sort of fanciful, whimsical looking at what would be aliens was he just had a person off camera jump out in a bunny suit and kind of tricked that performance out of young Carrie Guffey, if I'm getting the name right, and which I've never forgotten that. I thought that was amazing. I just think that the performance in your film of that, I couldn't believe, like, delivering dialogue like that's just, especially at that age, 4 years old. Let's also talk about the rest of the cast. That I think is the most impactful thing, when you've got, you don't have the budget of a major studio. And so casting is so critically important. Tell us about that and how you were able to put together this ensemble.
Yeah, let's start with Sarah Sutherland. There was no real one way in which Sarah and I became connected. I am and was a massive fan of Veep, but I wouldn't say that directly contributed to my, ending up working with Sarah or not. We had a number of conversations. I think she was, if I can say this for her, I think coming off of Veep, she was probably looking for something maybe a little bit different. And this film, what could be more different than being on an HBO sitcom for 7 years? And, we just had great conversations, and we just connected, and we connected over the character. And it was a collaboration from day one between she and I. And for each of the characters, Jared Abrahamson plays Danny. Again, it was really especially for the major roles, and even for the smaller ones, there was a great deal of preparation. And in the context of this film, it wasn't so much rehearsal as it was like world building and conversations that I had with them, for the main characters over months, to really kind of give them the backstory. This is a film where not a lot is said, much goes unsaid, yet everything the actors knew, where Dara was every day of those 2 years, when Danny met Therese during those 2 years, all of those things, that kind of specificity is just super important. And so, yeah, it was, I think it's always a collaboration when you work with actors. You give the role over to them, but you still, as the director, do your utmost to make sure they feel supported and to make sure that they feel like they're doing their best work.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Veep, because it's a wildly different tone than Like a House on Fire. But I think her experience as an actress on that show probably really, because the way that it's played in the show, it's not played it's played serious. It's played deadpan. They're not going for your canned laughter as a comedy per se. And I actually think that it must have prepared her to do such a heavy drama in Like a House on Fire. What also went into the production in terms of, like, I'm just curious, like, where you shot and how you created, like, there's a realness to this. And I'm always fascinated with the story of a coming back home, basically to confront your demons. And there are real demons that she is confronted with?
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, we decided pretty early on, the producers on the film and myself, we reside in Montreal, but we decided to make the film a Quebec-Ontario co-production, and we shot in Northern Ontario. And one of the things that gave the film was this, it's an authentically small town because it is a small town. And so, we found as we were developing the screenplay, the producers and I, that the claustrophobia of a small town would really lend itself well to Dara's experience. Montreal has 3 million people, so in the larger scheme of things, that's not exactly a small town. So that was a really early decision, though. That was years before we shot the film, and yeah, North Bay definitely has that kind of familiar quality to it, which can feel warm, but can also feel suffocating. And I think Dara oscillates between the two.
I'm curious, we're living at a time where movie theaters are not 100% back. They're starting to come back at, not 100% capacity, but I'm curious how audiences have reacted to the film and what things it's brought up. I mean, for me, it just brought up the wow, this is very authentic in terms of how a parent feels for a child. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's just those types of things are how it struck me. But I'm curious if you've had the opportunity to see it with even a small audience and what the response was and what kinds of things, how did they react? I'm just curious.
I mean, it premieres tomorrow, so the movie comes out tomorrow in theaters, and we were very lucky, and I'm very thankful. The film was a part of something called TIFF Selects in the fall, but because of the pandemic, that ultimately was a sidebar of TIFF done for market only. So we have shown the film to people, and I've beginning to do interviews and to get some feedback in that respect, and definitely spoke to some people, when the film played at TIFF back in the fall. But truly, it's going to be the next week. The film's going to come out in the next week, and I'm really going to get a better sense of how audiences react to it. But yeah, I mean, I think that what you just said is right on. I think people are definitely react to the intensity of Dara's experience. So much of the film is nearly all of the film is filtered through that experience, and so it's really kind of like we experience the story right next to Dara. But no, I'm very excited to share it soon.
I'm also curious about. I mean, I'm not a fan of necessarily the way that we sort of identify a certain filmmaker or type and whatnot. But I mean, would you say that this is you're a Canadian filmmaker, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm familiar with Canadian cinema, David Cronenberg, among others. But would you say that there's, because I actually notice a clear difference between an American indie and a Canadian independent filmmaker? Is that something that you're aware of, and is that in your thinking?
I'm proud to make Canadian films. I'm proud to make Quebec films. As I'm sure Quebec is a largely and majority Francophone province. So there's not a great deal of English directors based in Montreal. But I'm proud to be that and excited to continue to make films here. I agree with you. Yeah, I definitely think there's a difference, and I don't think that makes one better or worse. I think there's a lot of really wonderful filmmakers here, and quite frankly, there's a difference between oftentimes Quebec cinema and the rest of Canada. Again, it doesn't make one better than the other. They're both, compelling in their own ways. So yeah, they're different. I see a difference, but I think they all have strengths.
I would second that. I totally agree, and I would just compare it to types of food.
Yeah,
I love Mexican cuisine. I love Thai food. What can I say? I like Korean barbecue. I don't know. It's just, to me, it's the different flavors of cinema, so to speak. So, Jesse Klein, thank you so much for joining us on the Film Threat Podcast. It's truly been a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. I hope people see the film.